speaking of these rookies, so we just talked about Jahmyr Gibbs. If you drafted a rookie, let's say Devon Achane, right? I drafted a good bit of Devon Achane. I liked him entering the year. Are you doing your best after week 2 to hold on to that player? Or are you letting go of that player for one of the hot waiver ads?
So I forget who said this. I had an analyst on my show several years ago, and they brought up the idea that they don't like to draft rookies in the late rounds because they just pick those guys up off the waiver wire in week 3 or week 4 when everybody else drops them because they were impatient and they didn't produce yet, right? And I always thought that was such a smart idea, maybe not to avoid rookies in the late rounds entirely, but the idea of being really mindful about who's getting dropped in the waiver wire around this time of year and trying to jump on those rookies specifically, even if they haven't done anything yet, because you could be the one that has them during that breakout in the second half of the season, which is often when you're drafting rookies later, when it's not the Bijan Robinsons and the Jahmyr Gibbs and the guys who were taken really high, who you know are going to step in and get a lot of touches right away. When it is those later round guys, I'm drafting them thinking that I'm going to be holding them for a while before I'm actually going to see any results. And it depends on the league. It depends on how deep the benches are, whether you can hold them. And the other thing is it really depends on what your roster looks like after the first couple of weeks. Like if you took a bunch of running backs and they've panned out and you're feeling really good about your running back core, then Achane has a much tougher path to get into your lineup. And maybe you can let go of him and pick up a receiver, let's say, if you're a little weaker at receiver, and grab a Josh Reynolds, somebody like that who could step in and help you right away. So it really, once again, I'm always going to say this. I'm always going to try to be, level-headed about it. And it's case by case, and it's roster by roster, and trying to figure out where your needs are. But overall, if I'm drafting those guys, I'm expecting to hold on to them for at least 3 or 4 weeks and see a little bit of a sample size to see if they can work their way up the depth chart or start to get some touches, and then how they look on those touches too, right? Like someone like Tajay Spears, who hasn't gotten a ton of work. He's gotten a lot more snaps than we figured he would get, but not, a ton in terms of volume right now, but he's looked outstanding on it. And if Derrick Henry were ever out of the picture there, knock on wood, we don't want to see that happen, but whether it was an injury or a trade or whatever could move Henry out of the way, I think Tajay Spears is going to be a really good running back in the NFL. And it could happen this year if that opportunity arrives for him. But you want to see these guys out there. And that's why Achane, despite everything that we heard in the preseason about him, we just haven't seen much. And yes, he wasn't playing in week 1, right? So we only have one game to go off of, and he was 3rd on the depth chart in that game. So again, not much there, but he'll have an opportunity, I would think, this week to do a little bit of something, now that I think Salvon Ahmed is going to be out, and we're still waiting a couple weeks on Jeff Wilson here. So perhaps he'll get his shot this week. But it's been very strange in terms of everything we heard from the teammates and the coaching staff about how unbelievable he was, and the beat writers saying that he was impressing every single day out there. And maybe the injury in late August, maybe that impacted him, and that's held him back a little bit. But it really seemed like that positive drumbeat was there. And then for him to come out and, be so far down the depth chart, it's a little bit odd. And if you need help elsewhere, a guy like Achane, I think you could potentially let go, but I'd try to hold on to him if you could.
Yeah, that's where I'm at too. I got a question about Quentin Johnston on the mailbag this week. And I actually researched and looked at historically over the last decade, looking at wide receivers and how they performed, as rookies through the first 2 weeks of the season, and how that correlated with how they then performed from week 3, to the end of the year. And obviously, there's pockets, as you mentioned, you kind of look at the seasons and groupings and such. But there is a decent correlation between how well guys perform at the beginning of the year to how well they perform through the rest of the year. And, even someone like Amon-Ra St. Brown, who when he was a rookie and he broke out at the end of the year and he was a league winner, the first part of the season, he wasn't usable, but he was still scoring like 4 to 5 fantasy points a game, through the first few weeks of the season. That's where the worry then comes in with a player like QJ, where he's not even seeing the field. And even when he's on the field, he's not doing what Marvin Mims did last week, where Mims, has a decent fantasy performance on 5 routes run, So like a guy like Mims, you feel a little bit more optimistic about that. Okay, they let him, if they just unleash him a little bit more, then maybe he could produce and be a viable option for you. So he's a little bit easier to hold on to. But someone like QJ, look, like I said, there's going to be decisions that you have to make in fantasy throughout a season, and you're going to make decisions that burn you in the end. And that's a decision that might end up burning you in the end if you drop Quentin Johnston right now. But sometimes you have to make those choices because you need to get a Josh Reynolds or someone off the waiver wire in order to play them that week. Those are just sort of the tough decisions you got to make.
And I'm sure we've all been burned like that. I immediately comes to mind David Johnson during his rookie season.
Yeah.
Held him all year. I think I dropped him a week or two before he finally blew up down the stretch and ended up becoming an amazing keeper in that league for a different league mate who ended up picking him up off the waiver wire. So that was one that to this day still hurts a little bit. So thanks for bringing that up, JJ.
Look, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. It's inevitable.